everyone, and welcome to another Cheat Meal Monday. And today we're going to use the bread machine and we are going to make some very old-fashioned comfort food.
From Grandma's Diary, May 21st, 1942. We finished planting the upper lot and we planted corn. It's getting hot outside.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Cheat Meal Monday. It's another rainy day and this is day 4, day 5. I kind of lost count. But today I felt like let's make some comfort food. And so we are going to make Grandma's potato soup. And it comes from In the Kitchen of Mary and Martha. So this is a biblical based cookbook. Has all kinds of scriptures and all kinds of poems with it. And it has all kinds of recipes. So we are going to make Grandma's potato soup. But first we want to make some of our homemade bread. Now I'm not going to go step by step with this because I just did the same video last week with my homemade bread. But for those of you who missed it, it is classic white bread and it comes from Williams and Simona cookbook from the 1990s. And this is my favorite recipe, and I'm just going to give you above me the link so you can go back and you can get the recipe there. But I'm going to start making this so it can rise, and that way we can have it in time for supper time. So what we always do when you're making a bread machine recipe, you always want to go by how it is listed. And usually the bread machine recipes are listed in a certain order. So many people asked me in last week's video, yes, you don't have to use the bread machine. You can use any of these recipes and you can mix it by hand or mix it in a KitchenAid mixer. So you don't have to have a bread machine to make this. And I only use the bread machine to do all of the kneading and to the rising. I do not use the bread machine to do the baking. And so many people ask me why. Simply because I don't like the way the loaf looks when it's done. It doesn't have that old-fashioned look. Plus, it doesn't bake quite as nice as if you would put it in your own pan and bake it in your own oven. It tends to get more coarser. It tends to get just not as good looking loaf of bread. And plus, the consistency of it is just not the same. So I always like to bake my bread outside of the bread machine. So the first thing we're going to call for is 1 1/8 cup of water. And we're going to add our flour. That's 3 cups of flour. And I always use bread flour. And 1 1/2 tablespoons of dried milk. Somebody asked me if you could substitute regular milk. You can, but then it throws off the whole flour. You have to change the flour and then you have to change some other things. So I really wouldn't. I would just go and get the dried milk. Right now the Dollar Tree has carnation dried milk for $1 in a small package. But that package would be enough to do many loaves of bread. Then it calls for 2 tablespoons of sugar. And I'm going to share with you a link above how I buy my sugar and what I do with it to keep it in the pantry. Sugar never spoils if you keep it in a cool, dark location and you keep it bug-free. So sugar can live indefinitely. Then we're going to have 2 tablespoons of butter. And I always use real butter. I never use margarine. I always use the real butter. And I will cut it up in different slices, and it always seems to mix just perfect. And then it calls for 3 teaspoons of yeast. And this recipe is amazing, as you've seen last week. All right, and that's all it is to the bread. So we set it on the dough setting. Make sure you have it only on the dough setting. It takes about 3 hours. Then we will shape it in a pan and let it rise again, and it will be ready for supper time. But in the meantime, let's get working on our soup. Alright, so here we are to make the potato soup. What it calls for is 4 cups of potatoes and 1/2 cup of carrots, and the potatoes and the carrots are diced. To that we're going to add 2 cups of water and 1 teaspoon of dried onion. Now it calls for the dried onion, so I do not know if you could use regular onion or not because it calls for dried, and that's what I'm going to use. It says peel, quarter, and slice the potatoes in cubes. Place in a large saucepan with the carrots and water and dried onion. Bring to a boil and cook for 10 minutes. In the meantime, in a small pan, melt the butter and blend the flour and the chicken broth and cook that for 5 minutes until thickened. Then we are going to add the broth and the flour mixture to the cooked potatoes. We do not drain the potatoes. And all that we do is we add some cheese, and you can add parsley to it. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to take our butter and our chicken broth, and we're going to cook that in a separate kettle. So you can see there's a layer of fat on this chicken broth, and we don't use that fat. I try not to have as little fat as I possibly can in our diet. So what you just do is take a spoon and you're going to spoon that out. One thing nice about home canned food is like the fat always rises to the top. Now of course there's going to be some fat in there, and a lot of people would use the fat. I just don't like all that fat in it. So we're going to measure out 2 cups of the chicken broth. Now as you see, there's still a little fat in here, but we got some of it away. Now I'm going to do something different because I'm going to add my 1/4 cup of flour to the cold chicken stock. And you're going to add it slowly, and then I'm going to bring it to a boil. So we're going to add the 2 cups of chicken broth. And it had 2 tablespoons of butter. Now we're going to add 1/4 cup of flour. You could always substitute with cornstarch, and I'm really surprised this recipe calls for flour and not cornstarch. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to put a little in at a time, and you want to whisk it so you don't get any lumps. It's important to get whisking it as soon as you possibly can to get the flour incorporated. And once this is thickened, we are going to go ahead and we're going to add it to our potatoes and to our carrots when they are soft. Now I always add the flour to cold because for me, I was always taught that way, that you always add the flour when your liquid is cold. And that's just how I was taught, and I don't have no lumps now. Now it's not going to take long at all for this to get finished because it's actually not very much liquid. So I'm going to make sure I turn this gas stove down. My gas stove is very old and it does not have the settings that a lot of these stoves do, so I have to really watch it. So there you go. As you see, that's basically gravy. So we made that, and we have to wait until our potatoes and carrots are done, and then we just incorporate them all together, and that is what's going to make our soup. The bread is ready to bake when it's just about 1 inch to 2 inches above the pan. So there you go, my friends, is creamy potato soup with a couple carrots in it, and some homemade butter, which I have a video on that as well, and some homemade bread. Now, my friends, it doesn't get much cheaper than that. Take care, everyone, and we'll see you guys tomorrow.